Hello and welcome to the program. President of Ukraine Petro Poroshenko underscores the need to increase the presence of NATO warships in the Black Sea due to Russia's aggression and seizure of Ukrainian Navy ships and sailors. To talk more about the further possible aggressive actions of Russia in the Black Sea and their cooperation with NATO forces, we're joined in the studio today by Alexander Vinnikov, head of the NATO Representation to Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So first, since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO has increased its presence in the Black Sea. An overall view, how successful was Ukraine in reforming its security and defense sector in line with the cooperation NATO in the Black Sea there?
Well, I think you have to separate the two issues. Ukraine has started a comprehensive review of its security and defense sector back in 2014 when Russia began its aggression against Ukraine. NATO has been supporting Ukraine throughout that process. It has led to a number of significant results, the adoption of a number of significant policies, laws and concepts. And Ukraine has made certain progress on that road, yet much more work remains to be done. In parallel, when you talk about the NATO presence in the Black Sea, in response to Russia's aggression, NATO has agreed on a number of measures that need to be implemented to boost NATO's defense and deterrence. That has included a stronger presence in and around the Black Sea with more ships, more flights, and more land-based cooperation between NATO allies as well. So there is a lot more NATO in the Black Sea as a result of Russia's ongoing aggression.
Now, here's the dilemma, because NATO's presence in general has been in the narrative of Russia since the beginning of the aggression in Ukraine, saying we don't want NATO near our border, it's a danger, so we're going to react like that. How to ensure that NATO increases its presence and helps Ukraine without playing in a narrative of Russia pointing out at NATO as the aggressor?
Well, clearly NATO is a defensive alliance. It's a political military organization which works by consensus. So all decisions on NATO enlargement have been made by consensus at the request of countries that wish to join NATO. So NATO has accommodated new members since the 90s. And we believe that each European state is sovereign and has the ability to decide its own foreign and security policy free from outside interference. So our support to Ukraine is very much in line with that belief. We support Ukraine's sovereignty. We support Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. And we support Ukraine's freedom to choose its own destiny.
Now, coming back to the situation in the Sea of Azov, it's going to be tough for Ukraine to beef up its forces now that Russian fleet is still a lot there. How to help Ukraine on that matter, on the matter of the Azov Sea right now?
Well, as I said, NATO has boosted its presence in and around the Black Sea. Last year, in 2018, we had NATO ships in the Black Sea for a total of 120 days. The year before that, it was 80 days, so there's a clear increase. In addition, we have several allies who conduct reconnaissance flights and air policing over the Black Sea. We also have a multinational brigade, which is hosted in Romania. So NATO has certainly beefed up its presence. When it comes to supporting Ukraine, clearly there is political support, very strong statements by NATO leaders in response to the aggressive actions in the Sea of Azov by Russia in November. NATO leaders have called on Russia to immediately release the 24 Ukrainian sailors and the ships that Russia has seized. NATO has also said that there is no justification for Russia's aggressive actions against Ukraine and have called also on Russia to respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, including its navigational rights in its territorial waters.
Yeah, because the Sea of Azov doesn't belong to Russia.
By international law, it is a body of water that is shared by the two countries. And last but not least, I would add that NATO, as well as NATO allies bilaterally, are supporting the Ukrainian Navy in developing its capabilities, in developing its planning, and through various initiatives, including training, we seek to help Ukraine be able to provide for its own security to the best possible extent.
Which brings me to my next question, this idea of having rotating troops and from different countries. How does it help the Ukrainian army to get ready for different situations?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Like having
training,
joint training with certain corps, like let's say the Polish Corps, things like that, and with different skills and different set of skills. How does it help the Ukrainian army to go on the path of being completely independent and self-sufficient?
Well, Ukraine has set itself a very ambitious goal, which is to reach interoperability with NATO. Interoperability means that Ukraine's armed forces will be able to operate with NATO armed forces. So in order to enhance its interoperability, Ukraine has been participating in a number of NATO and allied trainings as well as exercises, all of which are aimed at boosting Ukraine's capacity and interoperability. A number of allies have training and equipping missions here in Ukraine. NATO as such also supports the enhancement of Ukraine's armed forces and their interoperability. We do this through exercises. In 2018, Ukrainian armed forces participated in 32 NATO exercises that are open to partners, as well as bilateral NATO country exercises. This year, Ukrainian armed forces are planning to participate in 35 of those. So all of these are excellent opportunities to share knowledge and build capacity. So we also have what we call a partnership cooperation menu, which is offered to all our Partnership for Peace members. And Ukraine this year projects to participate in around 300 of those, and many of which are funded from NATO's partnership cooperation budget.
So since 2014, did you see some improvement in the capabilities and the, as you said, interoperabilities of the Ukrainian army?
Yes, in general, since 2014, Ukraine's armed forces have come a long way, particularly when you look at their technical and tactical capabilities. They have made progress in areas like capability-based planning, like creating a unified medical command, progress in logistics and standardization, in combat capability, especially of the special operations forces, and the development and training of non-commissioned officers. So these are all very important areas where we have seen progress. At the same time,
what's the challenge?
At the same time, the challenge really is to make all of that progress sustainable and irreversible. So that's why at NATO we try to focus on the strategic level, so the systemic institutional reforms that need to happen in Ukraine's security and defense sector in order for this process of reaching Euro-Atlantic standards, for it to become irreversible and sustainable.
Which brings me to my next question. Last year, law was voted for on national security in Ukraine to reach certain standards of NATO. What's your stance on that? What next can be done? What's the next step that can be done for Ukraine?
The adoption of the law on national security, we see it as a very important step that Ukraine has taken, which will bring it closer to Euro-Atlantic standards and principles. Now, and we have supported the development process of that legislation with our advisors. Now, at the same time, this law is a framework law. which means that an additional package of secondary legislation is needed for it to be fully implemented.
For more specific measures, you mean?
So more specific measures, indeed. And this year the focus is on 5 specific legislative tracks. Firstly, the creation of a new parliamentary oversight committee, which has to be done through a dedicated law. Secondly, the law on the security service of Ukraine, the SBU, which also needs to be revised in keeping with the requirements of the law on national security. Thirdly, the law on intelligence service of Ukraine also needs to be rewritten. Then the law on state secrets and management of classified information. And last but not least, a package of measures that need to be implemented to reform the defense industry.
It is indeed a lot, and elections are looming. How to ensure that that integration to the and towards NATO's membership continues despite whoever's next candidate after the election?
Well, we have seen recently that the Ukrainian parliament adopted changes to the constitution of Ukraine, which embed European and Euro-Atlantic integration into the constitution. So we have no particular say in this or any particular position on this, but we clearly note and we welcome Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. Given this context, we believe that reform should continue, and we call on our Ukrainian partners to ensure that the momentum of reform is sustained despite the ongoing electoral cycle. And this is true of the security and defense sector, but this is also true in many other areas where the international community looks to Ukraine to not lose the momentum of reform. And I think this is a very important issue, which will also be addressed at the next Ukraine Reform Conference, which will happen in Toronto this year.
Now, what works also in the reforms here is what we could call the sandwich system, which is civil society is pushing for reforms, and international donors and NATO and other institutions are also pushing for the Ukrainian government for that. How to make sure that civil society has a proper voice being heard in international institutions such as NATO, such as the IMF, so the proper reforms can continue and Ukraine can deeply change?
I think Ukraine, one of Ukraine's strongest assets is its civil society, which is probably among the most vibrant civil societies anywhere in Europe. And that's why we also maintain a close dialogue with civil society here in Ukraine through both of our offices, the NATO Liaison Office and the NATO Information and Documentation Center. We are in touch with the think tanks and experts who follow reform and who advocate for reform. We frequent many of the same events that are dedicated to reform. So
there is an exchange with
there is certainly an ongoing dialogue, including in Kyiv, but also in Brussels, where civil society voices are also welcomed and heard. And you're right, civil society has been one of the main drivers behind the reform process and has energized the authorities of Ukraine to push forward with reform. From NATO's perspective, the focus now for Ukraine really should be on reform, because Ukraine is not reforming for the sake of the international community.
It's for itself,
or to get or to fulfill some conditions. As you said, it should reform for its own sake and for the sake of its people, who have sacrificed so much for a better future for their country.
And to conclude this interview, so would you say you're optimistic on after the Euromaidan and today's and next March election? Are you optimistic about the future of Ukraine right now, despite the war and despite all what's happening around?
Personally, having been in this country for over 3 years, I am very optimistic about the future of Ukraine. I think Ukraine has a lot of assets including its population, which would be the main asset, really. So I am very optimistic, and from NATO's perspective, we also believe that an independent, sovereign Ukraine, which can provide for its own security and contribute to European security, is really critical for the security of all of our members and the entire region, Euro-Atlantic region. So that is why we are also committed to supporting Ukraine, both politically and practically, as it reforms and as it develops its capabilities.
Well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was Alexander Vinnikov, head of the NATO Representation to Ukraine. Thank you for watching the program, and stay tuned for the rest.